Do you know one thing that never stops and that you always have to do throughout your entire life?
I think you don't mean going to the toilet, so
No, no.
you probably mean learning, that you need to keep on learning.
You need to. And for people like me who had times back at school where learning wasn't their main source of pleasure, let's say it that way, this was hard to understand. But when you get a bit older, you realize that learning in your private life, in your daily life, but also on the job, never stops,
Yeah.
right? And this brings us to the question of this podcast. How do you actually learn? How do we learn? And what's the best way to keep yourself kind of motivated to learn new things? Because learning can be hard. So you want to learn in a way that suits your personality, I guess. So
Yeah.
there is not one way, one perfect way to learn, but we want to dive a bit into our ways to learn new things. Let's say a new programming language comes out, for example, something totally new. How would you approach that? How would you start?
Yeah. So if it's brand new, it's actually a special case because then there wouldn't be a lot of resources on it. So
Indeed.
yeah, in that case, I would have to go with the official documentation and official examples, which in my case wouldn't be a big problem because that's the main source I use for learning programming languages or libraries in general. I tend to use their official documentations and examples, and yeah.
And sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to make that point because back when this whole thing here started, back with Angular, Angular 2,
Yeah.
I guess this was the case, right? There weren't many resources available, so you had to learn it
Yeah.
with the official documentation. So
It's true. I'm not 100% sure, but I think there maybe wasn't even an official documentation back then because I got started when it was still in beta or even alpha. I'm not 100% sure. So I had to, I know that I learned it by watching conference talks, by diving into their GitHub source code and some examples I could find here and there. So that's how I learned that back then. And if there would have been an official documentation, or maybe there was, I would have used that, or I did use that if it was available. So yeah, it is one of the things I still use nowadays, even if there are more resources available. But of course, it's not necessarily the right way for everyone, and it's also not the only resource, or it's not the only kind of resource I use, because of course we also have like tutorials on YouTube, we have paid courses, we have books, we have blog posts and examples by other people on the internet. So we have many sources, and I think it's really important to A, find out which source works best for you, but B, to also not get stuck with one source only, but instead you can use different sources for different parts of the learning journey. For example, a paid course or a complete course in general, no matter if it's paid or free, can be great if you have pretty much no idea about a topic because it then gives you a guided path to go through, and it takes away that complexity of having to find out what you need to learn in the first place because the course tells you, because that can be a problem if you're getting started with something and you don't even know which parts make up that something you want to learn. So that's something where a course can help you. If you have a more focused niche problem, if you're struggling with a specific feature, or you want to learn about a specific feature of a language or library or whatever, then the official docs or some dedicated blog post or a short YouTube tutorial that focuses on that problem might be more useful. So I guess that's how I generally approach that.
I think I do it a bit different. I also use different resources or sources. But if I have a brand new topic to me, so a topic where we have resources available already, I typically watch a video, for example, YouTube video, but a quick one, just giving me an idea about this product, about this technology. Then I tend to use also the official docs because the docs typically contain all information you need to work with that thing. Let's take Git, for example, because we all use Git, but we have a course on Git. So for such a course, you have to dive deeper, right? You have to dive into the things you don't use on a daily basis. So you go into these official docs, and at least I have the point where I don't understand something because something is not described the way I understand it. Let's say
Yeah.
like this. Then I tend to Google that specific problem I have, find blog posts, maybe also video, but typically these are blog posts because I want to have this in a written form. And then then I apply that command in this case, which might result in an error or a problem. Then I can reproduce this, and then I can dive deeper. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's kind of an iterative process to test something, see it doesn't work, Google it, fix it, understand it. And with that, I'm able to gain the knowledge relatively quickly, so to say,
Yeah.
because I really tackle the problems, because it's easy to understand the basics of something, but the part where it becomes a bit harder, this is the one you have to overcome. And to overcome it, you have to understand it. And for me, a big course wouldn't be the solution for this specific problem when I learn
Yeah.
something.
And I think these are two super important points: that it's an iterative process, and that you have to do something, that you have to build something or apply your knowledge. Because I think a danger when learning something new is that and we had a podcast episode about escaping tutorial hell, which kind of is the same topic here regarding this point. But there is that danger that you get stuck in the learning process and you keep on reading more and more tutorials or watching more and more videos, but you always have that feeling of, I need to learn more, I need to get a better understanding before I can use it. And it's actually the opposite, at least for me, and I think for most people, that you, as you said, that you have to apply that knowledge, that you have to apply it, because then you will definitely encounter new problems, which you didn't anticipate or which you didn't see coming. But by facing those problems and by finding solutions, by understanding what caused those problems, you're making progress and you're getting better. And therefore, as you said, it's this iterative process where you start, you learn something, you try something, you learn more, and so on, and you dive deeper and deeper. And that's exactly how I learn as well.
And I also have an example for that. When did Flutter come out? 18, 19? I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, so I think the stable version, I think, was released back in 18.
18, something like
Yeah.
that. Right. And it was new, right?
Yeah.
And you learned it. And the way you learned it, and you prepared the course, it was a combination, because we wanted to have a course on that topic, because our job is to create video courses on mainly web development or development topics, in that case mobile app development. So we had to be quick to create the course, but at the same time you had to understand all the details for this new technology. So what you basically did, I guess, if I remember correctly, you read the docs, you played around with Flutter, you used your previous knowledge you had from other programming languages, you built the course projects, and whilst building these projects, you saw problems that you solved. So again, this process was a perfect example of how you learn, for example, new things, because it took some time, to be honest. It wasn't a quick process because it was new, but still, by reading the docs, creating projects, and specifically based on that projects, creating a course teaching all these important concepts, you were able to learn that quite fast still, and in a lot of detail. And that was a very challenging learning path, I guess, back then.
Yeah, of course, it helped that Flutter is in some aspects similar to something like React. You work with components, you manage state. So I was able to leverage that existing knowledge. But yeah, it is exactly how you said it. I learned it back then with official docs and by building demo projects. And I still do that up to this day. If I learn something new, I build a lot of demo projects and apply that knowledge I got from the docs, for example, to learn that library language, whatever it is. Now, as I said, I also do sometimes work with videos or courses, though, especially if I want to get a quick overview, or if a topic is brand new to me and I don't want to manually find out which aspects I have to learn, or if I'm in an environment where I want or have to do some passive learning, like theoretically, if you're on a flight or something like that, following along whilst building stuff might not be too convenient if you have limited space. And so on. It might be more convenient to like watch a course there. So that's something you can do. It might not be what you're doing on a long flight that you have to spend every minute on learning, but if you are in such an environment, that could be something where such more passive instruments shine.
Still, we can discuss all these different ways to learn, but the idea or the imagination that it flies to your mind, you know what I mean? That it's suddenly there isn't true.
Yeah.
It's always something that you have to do, you have to commit to, and you have to kind of embrace this learning process to motivate yourself, right? Because to be honest, reading the docs of some programming language, of course, it's not the most exciting thing, but otherwise you can't understand it, right? So you have to be motivated to learn something, and that's something with all this advice we can give. If you just want to spend 5 minutes on something, you won't learn it. That's not possible.
Yeah, but I have to say, it is actually fun for me if I decide to learn a new language and I see the progress I'm making. I'm able to build something which I wasn't able to build 5 minutes ago. Actually, that is really motivating and fun to me. It's not something I have to do and I don't like. I actually do like it quite a bit, I have to say.
Though you are a very fast learner, because I guess I can judge that. And as we have this instant gratification society now, you know what I mean? It's difficult because sometimes it can take an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, a week until you make that progress. And this point is a difficult one, I guess.
Yeah, and it gets slower the deeper you dive into something. Like you have some quick success events relatively early on when you get started. I mean, setting something up and writing a first line of code that does something, that's a quick win. But of course, the more complex the topics get, the harder it might be to wrap your head around them and to really achieve the thing you wanted to achieve or build the thing you wanted to build. And yeah, definitely that can therefore then be a bit more frustrating.
And little promotion here, that's also the value our courses provide, because we dig into these difficult topics, and for us it's not an option to say we don't care. We have to understand these and teach these in a way that you students understand.
Yeah, and that it's smooth and that you have like an even learning curve. That's our goal, that we try to make sure that with our courses you don't just get that overview, but you then also get those step-by-step bite-sized instructions which give you a lot of success events and a lot of knowledge, and give you that feeling, and not just the feeling but the actual knowledge, that you're making good progress, that you're learning something, and not just the basics, but also the more advanced parts. Absolutely, yeah.
So courses make that work a bit easier for students because we do this heavy lifting, so to say. But the learning still is challenging, right?
Yeah.
So we can't take this away. So if I quickly summarize what we talked about so far, I would say learning, or how I learn, means I get an overview of the topic, as I said, via a short video, dive into the docs, try things, see if something goes wrong, Google this, read blog posts, articles, whatever, try it again until I understood it, and then continue until I got the whole concept. That's my quick take on learning, actually. I do use courses sometimes, yes, but I'm not, as I said, the guy watching a 30 hours course. That's not how I work. Still, it's totally fine to do that, because if you really intensively and actively watch a 30 hours course, code along, this definitely makes life a lot easier if it's a good course.
Absolutely. And it's really important to find out what works for you, because just because something works for us or is our preference, of course, does not mean that it's the best way of learning something for everyone. That's really something every person has to find out on their own to determine which resources work best for them. I mean, I sometimes, if I learn like a new library for JavaScript or something like this, I dive into the source code on GitHub to understand how something works under the hood, because I'm interested in that and I want to understand how that works. But you don't need to do that. That's just something I like to do and which helps me. But that might not be necessary for other people. And therefore, it's really important to like find out what best works for you.
I guess for you, it's not doing something because you read that you have to do it that way. As you said, you really want to understand why I do it that way, right? Because it's different. You read something, okay, if you want to create a component, do it like this, for example. But you understand how components really work, right? So you know what I mean? So it's that under the hood thing that you're interested in.
I'm interested in that, and of course, I'm also convinced that it helps with the course creation, because whilst I sometimes get feedback that some people don't care about the under the hood part, I find it important to at least give a rough summary of how something works so that you can understand why you're doing it like this. Because otherwise, if you don't have that understanding, you're just learning about a bunch of solutions and you might be able to apply them. But if you're then facing a problem you've never faced before, you might be lost. If you, on the other hand, understand why exactly you're using a certain solution in a certain scenario, you might also be able to come up with solutions to problems you haven't faced before. And that's the goal with my courses, and therefore I have to understand how things work under the hood.
It's the difference between a blueprint and understanding a topic, right?
Yeah.
Because a blueprint only works for this specific scenario, but if you come to a more complex problem, then you have to dive deeper, and if you don't have that knowledge, then you have a problem.
Exactly. And yeah, I guess that's therefore how I learn things and how I try to help others learn with help of the courses I and we create.
Yeah, and I guess there is no specific secret behind that. That's also something we can definitely say. There is no shortcut to this whole learning thing.
Yeah.
I guess what I said at the beginning, that you come to a point in life where you see that you will have to learn your whole life, but this isn't something bad. That's the important conclusion here. Learning is good because it keeps your brain alive, I would say. You're capable of doing things. And as you said, it's also a good feeling to understand something, to learn something new, right? And if we keep that in mind and have our own learning techniques, then learning isn't that bad, actually. It's a good thing.
Yeah, and I would say that if you really hate learning, you might be learning the wrong things, because I think if you're learning something where you at least have a slight interest for, it shouldn't be that horrible. I understand that it can be overwhelming at times because it might feel like a huge mountain of knowledge you need to gain, but then it's important to keep in mind, you don't need to climb that mountain on one day. You might not even need all that knowledge you think you need. Get started with small steps, with small problems, and then figure out the way as you go. So really, getting overwhelmed is easy nowadays because there's so much to learn and so many resources, and therefore it's important to set smaller goals and kind of, as I said, figure out the way along the way. But if you still hate it, it might be the wrong thing you're learning. And if you have to learn it for a job, it might even be the wrong job. Of course, not always easy to switch the job, and sometimes you just have to do something you don't like. But at least if it's something you do in your free time, away from the job, I think it should be something you do enjoy to some extent at least.
And this getting overwhelmed thing is also an important one, because the worst thing that can happen, no matter if you want to learn something or have to learn something, not even getting started because you're overwhelmed is the worst outcome. Because if you're overwhelmed and say, okay, let's take this back 3 steps, I start with the basics, but at least you start. But if you quit from the beginning, then you will never learn it, right? So this is also something you have to be aware of. As you said, it's easy nowadays. We have so many inputs, so many resources, but getting started with a clear step-by-step approach always helps to find your way through this whole forest, whatever you want to call it, you have to navigate through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, therefore, I guess that's how we learn things and how we tackle problems or try to dive into new technologies and so on. And as always, we're of course interested in learning what your opinion on that is and how you learn new things.
But I'm pretty sure that most of our people listening to this podcast have a big advantage when learning new things.
Yeah, because they have our courses.
Indeed. Yeah. So as you know, on academind.com,
yeah,
you can know, of course, we have these courses, you know about that, but still we hope that this podcast also helped you to get an insight how we learn, and that we also have to learn things the way you are. Well, except using our courses doesn't make sense for us, but this is our take on how to learn new things.
Yeah. So see you in the next episode, hopefully.
Bye-bye.